Glenn Fleishman on taking control of securing your Apple devices, Find My and AirTags, and more. This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by Notion AI, the one tool that does it all. Try Notion AI for free at notion.com/MacVoices. Well, and this feels like it also meshes into the take control of securing your Apple devices, because some of this we've already been talking about.
Yeah, I had these. It's funny. We've taken 4 books and consolidated them into sort of 2 new books, which is I had a Take Control of Mac Security book. I had Take Control of, I have to think of the title. Joe and I would always use a shorthand in messaging. We call it TCO blah blah, because the title was so long and we both knew what each other meant. It was hilarious. But so it was Take Control of Networking and Security in iOS and iPadOS. And the book had become so big. It was 350 pages. And at some point a year or so ago, I thought people aren't even reading the networking part anymore. There's some useful stuff in there. It hasn't changed very much. People have mastered it. I'm not giving people enough information, and the changes are really minor, and it's hard for a new reader probably doesn't want to go through it because they don't need most of it. And an existing reader is getting an update. Like, they don't even know what's changed, even if we mark it all up. So we combined the security part from that book about iOS and iPadOS and the security part from macOS security, because now all 3 platforms actually have a high overlap in features, because as Apple's brought the 2 closer and closer together, or they introduce a new feature like lockdown mode, and they make it available and sync it across all your devices using those platforms. So that was the one move, and the other was taking the privacy part of that book and putting it into the new Keeping Safe book. So people who are, I'm sure everybody at home is always tracking which Take Control books exist, but this is how we're trying to make sure the content is like fresh, but also useful as the platforms change, and as Apple changes its approach. So the Take Control of securing your Apple devices, again, a little bit of an awkward title, but we worked so hard to find something that would make sense, is all of the features you need to know about if you're trying to dig in or configure your Mac, like specific Mac features, all the things about iPhone and iPad that are unique, including stolen device protection, which we talked about. That's included. But then it's the things that have kind of merged between the platforms. And I mentioned lockdown mode, which, as I say, most people don't need, because it protects you against the kinds of intrusions that governments are doing, or criminal syndicates, because they are the only ones with the kinds of 0-day exploits that they would send you through, say, messages or some other means. But the fact is, it is now available. So activists and politicians, journalists around the world who have some reason to fear or believe governments are surveilling them or attempting to, all those people can click a button in any of the platforms. And Apple keeps improving the feature slightly. They keep tweaking it. So I appreciate that. One that got me, though, this is a funny one. Do you know the private Wi-Fi address feature? It's a little bit of a deep networking feature. Have you ever come across this? It's another one of these, like, it's not a gotcha, but it's like a...
Not that I know of. I mean, maybe if you describe it, I will have run into it, but I don't know it by that name.
Well, a few years ago, so Apple's trying to counter this problem. So, every network adapter, whether it's Ethernet or token ring in the past, or Wi-Fi, every adapter has a unique thing called a media access control layer number, a MAC layer, just to be confusing. And it's 8 sets of 2-digit hexadecimal numbers separated by colons. It's as it's expressed. Again, you never have to see this as a human being. You should never see this number. It's not very useful to you, right? Or no, I think it's 6 digits, or 6 sets of 2 digits. I don't want to get that wrong, because, it's very important. Anyway, so what Apple discovered, and a lot of researchers discovered, is that people, not crackers, but people trying to track people's whereabouts. I'm saying crackers, really marketers, and sometimes people with criminal aims could use a MAC address to track people across networks, because if your Wi-Fi address, your device is always going to change. You may be perfectly secure using a VPN, but your adapter on your Mac, every time it connects to a Wi-Fi router in a public place or anywhere, it is connecting and uses the MAC address as its identifier to go on that local address. And so in your own home, when you use a local router, the MAC address is the thing that is actually interacting with your local network to give you kind of a unique location. It's how, if you have a router that lets you assign a fixed IP on your local network, you have to enter the MAC address for that. So you're traveling all over the place. There are a lot of portals, Wi-Fi portals that are run by the same companies. There's a lot of marketing stuff run by the same companies. People were discovering, security researchers were discovering, and privacy researchers, that people could be tracked by their adapters. So their laptop or their phone would provide a way to identify them across all these networks, identify their behavior, and their whereabouts. So Apple and other companies introduced what is called, I'm trying to look up the exact features, private. I always get confused about this because they've got different versions of this. It's private. Sorry, I'm not on the exact terms. Private IP address. They call it private Wi-Fi address. This is why it's confusing. They call it private Wi-Fi address because they don't want people to have to deal with the notion of a MAC address. It's too confusing, right? And so when you're on a network that's not a known network, then it will send out a unique address, a unique MAC address to that network. But what they did in the latest version is Apple has added a way to control that even further. So a lot of people don't know this feature exists, and it's fine because it's a privacy protecting feature. And if you're going to 50 different Starbucks or something, you don't need to have the same MAC address. It doesn't matter. So every Starbucks you go to, there'll be a different one generated. But Apple found, as I can tell, kind of working backwards, they haven't said this, but you can kind of tell it from the technology, that they need to tweak it because some people need to have, some people want a fixed random address that's generated by their device for the same network every time they go there, so that when they authenticate, some routers and some systems will authenticate you by your MAC address. So otherwise you have to keep going and logging back in. You have all these issues. I've discovered this even. I have a, Netgear Nighthawk router, and it notifies me every time a new device joins the network. Well, I start getting all these notifications after I install 18.0 and Sequoia. I can't figure out why. It's because, all my devices keep coming up with new MAC addresses, and the Nighthawk router's like, this just joined. I'm like, oh, and so, it keeps them static as long as you've joined the network within 2 weeks. The default is that it keeps them static for that period of time. But it's a great setting. So now when I connect to the home network, there's settings you can put in place so that the same MAC address is used on my home network every time I connect. So I stop getting those messages. But this might solve a mystery for anybody who has a Nighthawk or a similar security router. Suddenly we're being told, hey, there's all these devices and you're like, wait, that's my iPhone. I know that device. Like, yeah, well, it doesn't look that way to the network. It looks like it's a unique piece of equipment. So that's weirdly one of the most extreme ones. The other one is GateKeeper, which is the hidden feature that in macOS that lets you lets Apple, you and Apple in kind of this dance, figure out what apps you can run. So you could say, I only want to run apps from the App Store, or I'll run them from the App Store and any known developer. If it's not a known developer, i.e. somebody with a developer account who's used this process to get Apple to sort of notarize their app and say it's legitimate, Apple keeps tightening that down. So I had to document almost an entirely new process Apple's added. If you want to run an app that's from a company or an organization that isn't paying the Apple subscription fee and running their apps through this like simple step they have to do so that it passes that test. And I know what's funny is, depending on who you know and who you work with, some people say, I've never run an app that gave me an error because they're using only commercial apps. But if you get into academia and research, there's tons of apps that are developed by researchers and staff members at universities and whatever. They release them for free, and their university won't pay the $100 a year fee for development. They can't get the paperwork done, or they just don't care. And so some people are like, there's 50 apps I run that are unsigned and unnotarized. So now I upgraded. Now I have to approve all of those apps, and Apple created a new process. So I've documented that in this book as well. And if you don't know about it, it doesn't matter to you. But if you do, you'll be like, oh, thank goodness. I don't know how this new thing works.
You've made me suddenly feel a lot better, because now I know I have run into the private and now private Wi-Fi thing, because
Mm-hmm.
I might pull out a laptop or a device that hasn't been on in 2 weeks, and I have an Eero set up, and Eero notifies me when something
Oh,
new joins the network.
yeah.
That would completely explain it, because it's like, why don't you know? You should know this. This is mine. I've used this plenty of times.
Yeah.
Now I understand that something in there has expired, and it's re-logged in, and it lets me know. Which I mean, it's good. It's not even an inconvenience. It's just one of those weird things. Now I understand why.
Yeah, I'm holding this up to the screen, but I'll explain it to people who are actually listening and not watching, which is, oops, I'm going the wrong direction. This is the screen you see in, this is 18.0. It hasn't been updated 18.1 yet. It says private IP address. Whoops, I'm still going the wrong way. And then it shows you what they call a Wi-Fi address. It's really a MAC address, but this private Wi-Fi address has a pop-up now, which is off. So if you're on a network you completely trust, like your home network, you turn it off and it just uses the same address, which is what you want, what I want. It has fixed, which it keeps it the same over a 2-week period. I think it is. If you've connected at any time in 2 weeks, it just keeps it the same indefinitely. And then it has rotating, which changes it, at a more frequent interval. So you won't be thrown off the network during a session, but it means kind of every time you go back to the network, you're going to have a different address. So even over short periods of time, you won't be able to be tracked even by this fake MAC address, which was, that was like the secondary concern, is Apple was inventing a fake address for you, a fake MAC address. But then if that stays consistent, it's another way to track you. It's kind of how Apple developed the privacy protecting parts of Find My network crowdsourcing, is that because it sends out encrypted Bluetooth signals using the network name of a Bluetooth network to uniquely identify a device and let other devices around it, like a Mac, receive that, know it's a Find My signal and upload it without having any information about what device is transmitting it. Doesn't know if it's an AirTag, doesn't know who it belongs to, whatever. Apple's privacy protecting part is it rotates those encrypted Bluetooth IDs, because otherwise someone could track your AirTag by its fixed encrypted Bluetooth name. Now, you and I probably wouldn't think of this because this isn't our field. And I'm so glad, like, you read it and you're like, oh, of course, if you give something a fixed ID, someone's going to take advantage of it, a marketer or somebody worse. So Apple, this is how they stay one step ahead of us, which is great.
And it gives you a real appreciation for the know-how and the technology that goes into doing these things to help keep us safe. I mean, there are companies out there that have shortcutted this and say, oh, here's a Bluetooth tracker, and it's just screaming out at everybody that it can find, as opposed to the way Apple approaches it, and it works for the tracking part, but it doesn't add exposure of privacy in a different level.
I'll tell you something, because I also have a book, of course, because I have too many books on Find My and AirTags. Is a book devoted to it because it became such a huge part of another book. We had to spin it off into its own book, and there's so much subtlety in it. But what I've discovered is Google released its own tracking system, confusingly called Find My Network, I think. Not Find My, but Find My Network, this year. And Google tracking, I actually hope Apple will adopt some of Google's principles, is in order to reduce the chance of unwanted tracking, the Google devices will only broadcast their crowdsourcing information in certain circumstances. So you have to have a certain number of devices, which Google won't reveal, near you. So you're in, say, a public place like a cafe. They won't let people query the location very often either. So if someone's put a device somewhere, they can't just query every minute and see where someone's moving if it's in someone's car, in addition to the anti-tracking provisions that Apple and Google and the industry at large have now adopted, which is to notify people when AirTags or Google tracking devices are moving with them. But Google is particularly interested in making sure that the only place that locations are sent from on these compact trackers is places where there are a lot of people. So it's likely you're not at home. And I thought that is a really clever bit of design philosophy. And because the odds are, even if you're in an apartment building, by proximity, maybe there's, how many Android or Apple devices are near you within 40 feet. And if it's, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, maybe it doesn't send it. and everybody in everybody else's apartment is the signals are too weak. But if you're in a cafe, you're in a auditorium, you're in a workplace, it will, because it seems to think I guess it's safer. It's more likely that a tracker the person hasn't been alerted it's traveling with them, so it's probably not transmitting in a totally unwanted fashion. And the Google algorithm is that you have enough people around you that you're not in an unsafe location, sort of, too. So I kind of like the subtlety about how they've approached it. And Apple keeps tweaking what they do with AirTags and Find My Network as well. So hopefully they'll adopt some of that refinement.
And just to keep the record straight, that book is Take Control of Find My and AirTags.
Yes,
also
right.
Available from Take Control Books.
We trimmed a few. I had at one point, I think, 11 active books in the height of the pandemic because there were so many new things happening. And now I think I'm down to just eight books.
Is that all, Glenn?
Yeah.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by the new Notion AI, a single tool that does it all. Search across Notion and other apps, generate docs in your own style, analyze PDFs and images, and chat with you about anything. Try Notion for free at notion.com/MacVoices. How does Notion AI do all that? By connecting to multiple knowledge sources like GPT-4 and Claude. With now in beta AI connectors, it can search across Slack discussions, Google Docs, Sheets, and Slides. More tools like GitHub and Jira are coming soon. With all those assets and connections, not only can you get organized and get work done, but pretty much anything is possible. Not sure about that? Over half of the Fortune 500 companies are. Their teams are sending less emails, canceling more meetings, and saving time searching for their work by using Notion. Shouldn't you be part of that group? Try Notion for free when you go to notion.com/MacVoices. That's all lowercase letters, notion.com/MacVoices, to try the powerful, easy-to-use Notion AI today. And when you use my link, you're supporting MacVoices. Notion.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Notion for supporting MacVoices.
We just released, just before we recorded this, Take Control of Facebook and Messages, which also includes the phone app. And then we'll have Take Control of Calendar and Reminders out soon. And Take Control of Facebook and Messages is interesting because huge changes in messages, like lots of little things and big features and the Apple Intelligence and whatever. A lot of very interesting changes in the phone app, but most of them requiring 18.1. And then Facebook is like, nah, we're not going to do anything with Facebook this time. It's like, really? Nah, we won't improve. I'm sorry, FaceTime rather.
FaceTime,
we won't improve FaceTime. We won't improve that. They did add one feature that I want to call out because it's handy. Is Apple has finally added a background replacement, like green screen replacement, for any video source. So it can be FaceTime, but it'll work with Zoom and Teams, anything where the system, the iPhone, iPad, or Mac system video framework is used. So you get like the video icon in your toolbar on a Mac. That now has backgrounds as of 18.0 iOS on iPadOS and Sequoia. Which I think is great. It's only, 4 years after everybody else offered it. So, hey.
Yeah. And again, to keep the record straight, that one is Take Control of FaceTime and Messages. Also,
I'm saying Facebook.
Yeah. Facebook's a whole other matter.
They've polluted me. They've polluted my brain. But it's actually, I was testing the phone thing is great because if you want to record phone calls now, you can record the, I mean, it has a permission aspect to it, but, I don't know how many times you're on the phone with like a medical professional, or I don't know. It's like always calls with the school with my kids, or there's things where someone's giving me a lot of detail and I'm either sitting there tapping away or trying to write notes or remember it. And I'll just ask permission. I'll say, do you mind if I record the call? I don't need an official record. I just need these for my notes. And the people almost always will say yes. You just tap the button and it says, this call is being recorded. It doesn't give you an opt out. The other person could then hang up rather. And then it records it. And when it's done, it pops it over to Notes, and then Notes transcribes it, and you can view it or edit it in Notes and share it and whatever. And I'm like, voice call transcriptions. What a concept. We're back in the it's like 2011 or something, but it's so great to have it finally built in. And I just think it makes the phone app much more useful as a generalized tool.
And it's all these, I don't want to say little things, but it's all these options that, you try to get people to be aware of, because a lot of them are new or new to that person. And, they go and buy a phone. And of course, with all due respect to AT&T, Verizon, Best Buy and all, the salespeople are there to sell the phone, not to really educate you on everything it can do, unless that's what they have to do to sell the phone. And so this is where, I feel it's like it's up to you with the Take Control books. It's up to me with getting you on here to talk about them, to help educate and make people aware of features I didn't know about. And I try to keep up with this stuff. How's the average person supposed to? Yeah.
And if there's 100 features in Messages, I mean, I keep calling Messages as like, it's the 100 pounds of flour in a 5-pound sack problem. There's just so much in Messages. They keep sort of like, let's squeeze it in harder. If we just push. So if you were to give a talk, like if I were to go to a user group and give a talk about Messages, it would be like, what are you, there could be 50 people and every one of them might have a different feature they want to know about and not care about almost any of the other 49 features. So that's where a book comes in handy, because you can skim it, but it makes it really hard to do like Apple does do. They have online learning, they have manuals, they do in-store stuff. User groups have lectures, they bring people in. There's what you're doing here is great because we're highlighting things we think are particularly useful, but I feel like we could do 40 hours of this and still not cover everything that's in Messages. And it's maddening, but I'll tell you one other thing that sort of cracked me up is oh wait, now I think I've lost it. I was thinking about Messages. It was a new feature. Oh my gosh, I have entirely lost it. Oh, just figuring out. I know it's tapbacks. So tapbacks in the latest version of iOS, iPadOS, and macOS, you can now use an emoji with tapbacks. But just understanding, like they're presented different. You have to tap a thing. What does it look like if someone's not using the latest version? Like the way it's presented is weird. So if you want to know if you're in a group conversation and you want to know who tapped back what, you have to tap like this popover and then it expands to show you whose emoji were like, it's just, I could spend 20 minutes explaining the tap back feature. And some people care, but again, most people probably don't care about tap back, but it's so detailed now. It's almost maddening, except for the people who like it, it's great that it's actually full featured.
So I'm go just a little farther with that. So I know what tapback is, because it's, the way that it's a quick way to call up the camera app or launch a shortcut or something. But what do you mean it can be used with an emoji?
Oh, this is tapbacks in Messages is this is great. No, sorry. This is my point though, right? There's there's back tap and there's tap back.
Back tap. Yes,
No.
You did it with Facebook. I just did it with back tap.
That's great. Back tap or tap back. It's say that 10 times fast. Right. The tap backs and Messages are the thumbs up or heart or whatever onto a message. Right. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I wasn't right. And then there's tap back, which is when you tap the back of the phone multiple times and can trigger an action. That's great. You could trigger your back tap to do tap backs probably with a shortcut. I know what I was thinking about. Screen sharing. Sorry. Apple has revamped screen sharing in the latest versions of all their operating systems when it's used through FaceTime and Messages. And it's not that they didn't document it, but I got to that part of revising the book and I was like, this is totally different. And it's much improved. It's much more consistent. I really think they did a great job with it. But you think, people don't even know this capability exists because it's a little buried and they try to use it and it's kind of confusing what's happening. And it's different in one-on-one conversations versus one-to-many conversations in FaceTime. Anyway, I think I spent a full day working on the revisions because it was so intricate. But once I explained it to myself, I'm like, okay, I can explain this to other people, but it's just, I would say it's not precisely intuitive, and there's a bad migration path. If you'd ever used it before the latest releases and you're now trying to use it, you would be baffled, as I was, because nothing works the way you expected it would work from last time.
I've got to look into that because I do use that at times for different purposes. And I guess, but on the other hand, to be fair, I have not updated all my production machines to Sequoia.
That's the same thing. I'm on Sonoma on my main office machine. I have a laptop it was running betas and is running, now running the beta of Sequoia 15.1 for testing, but I'm kind of always like, I want to be, the .1 release, maybe the .2 release on the machine that I have to use every day so that everything doesn't break when I'm trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, exactly. Glenn, we got to do this more often. I mean, first of all,
I'd be delighted.
The volume of books is crazy, but more importantly, the volume of information is equally amazing, because instead of just covering the usual things, somehow we always end up digging into the really not obscure things, but just the stuff that never seems to see the light of day.
Undiscovered things. Well, that's what I love doing that too, because I get so much email. This is one of the useful things about being kind of like a public Mac person is people ask me questions on Mastodon or Blue Sky, and then the Mac 911 column. I know it's bugging people. And so when people don't ask me about something, I'm like, oh, that's like, I know it's bothering them, but I also know the things that they're not using because they're not asking questions about them, and they're confusing. So if they were using them, they would ask.
Makes perfect sense. I'm not even going to try to go through all the books we talked about. I'm just going to tell you to go to takecontrolbooks.com, search on Glenn Fleishman's name, and you'll see all of his books pop up, and then just buy all of them right then, because you need these books. You really do. I found out that I need these books more than I realized. So again, takecontrolbooks.com. Glenn, it's a pleasure. I love the information. I love the laughter. It's a lot of fun.
It's so nice to talk to you. Really, just ask me back whenever. I spent most of 2024 deep in a book. And actually last year, the same thing. I've been producing books for the last 2.5 years, like physical books that have taken up a lot of time, but I am moving back to the virtual world a little more, and would love to be back on. So thank you very much.
You are always welcome to talk about any of the projects, Mac and iOS or otherwise. So
all right.
It's standing invitation.
Thank you.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. I hope you have listened the whole way through to this interview, because it has been chock full of really great information that you may not even be aware of, features that you really can use that can benefit you and can make you safe. Please get out there, check them all out. I'm Chuck Joyner. As always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.